The distant horizon was ablaze with light as the Galactic Federation's ships descended onto the dusty plains of Athon 5, a remote human colony. The rumbling of engines echoed across the arid landscape, sending a cloud of dust spiraling into the sky. Lieutenant Commander Zolvrak stood at the helm of his landing craft, his posture rigid with arrogance as he surveyed the terrain. His armor, a sleek amalgamation of alien metals and nanotech, shimmered in the harsh sunlight. Beside him, his second-in-command, Sarek, glanced at the readout from their scanners. "Primitive life forms," Sarek muttered, disdain coating his words. "These humans have nothing but sticks and stones. This will be over in moments." Zolvrak smirked, his confidence bolstered by years of conquest across the galaxy. "Indeed, this is hardly worth our time," he replied. "We'll crush them swiftly and be back on the ship before the next star cycle." As the landing craft touched down, the ramp lowered with a hiss. The Federation troops marched out in perfect formation, their energy rifles humming with lethal potential. They expected nothing but easy subjugation of these backwater colonists. But as the dust settled, they saw something unexpected on the horizon. A line of human soldiers stood firm, their shields raised, and long spears glinting in the sun. At the center of the human line, Captain Thomas gripped his spear tightly. His heart pounded not from fear, but from determination. The Federation had underestimated them, assuming that a lack of advanced weaponry equaled weakness. Thomas knew better. He knew the strength of his people, forged through years of hardship on this barren planet. They had adapted and learned to use what they had, a spirit of unity, tactics honed by necessity, and an indomitable will to survive. "Hold the line!" Thomas called out, his voice strong and steady. "Do not break formation. Remember your training." The human soldiers adjusted their shields, forming an impenetrable wall. The Phalanx, an ancient formation from Earth's history, had been perfected here on Athon 5. Behind their shields, the humans were a single, unbreakable unit, each soldier protecting the one beside him. The ground vibrated as the Federation troops charged forward, energy rifles raised. The humans did not flinch. They stood their ground, shields locked together, spears pointed forward like the quills of a porcupine. As the alien forces drew nearer, Thomas gave the signal. A chorus of yells erupted as the human line moved forward with precise, disciplined steps. The first clash was a deafening cacophony of energy blasts and metal striking metal. To the aliens' shock, their weapons did not pierce the human shields as easily as anticipated. The human spears, made of advanced alloys harvested from the planet, punctured the supposedly impenetrable armor of the Federation troops. Zolvrak watched in disbelief as his soldiers stumbled, their formations faltering against the unexpected resistance. "What is this?" he snarled, his eyes narrowing in anger. "They wield mere spears, yet they defy us." Sarek's face paled. "These are no ordinary spears, Commander. Their tips are lined with a substance that disrupts our energy shields. They've been prepared for us." Zolvrak's expression darkened, a mix of frustration and grudging respect. "So they have. We must adapt. Send in the drones, disrupt their formation." Thomas spotted the incoming drones, a fleet of metallic insects swarming toward the human ranks. "Shields up! Prepare for aerial assault!" he shouted. The human formation tightened, shields raising to form a protective dome. The drones swooped down, releasing pulses of energy meant to scatter their adversaries. But the humans stood firm. Each pulse was absorbed by the layered shields, their edges sparking with the impact but holding strong. As the drones made another pass, Thomas saw his chance. "Now!" he ordered. The rear line of soldiers hurled their spears with practiced precision, each one finding its mark among the drones, sending them crashing to the ground in fiery bursts. The Federation troops, now visibly shaken, hesitated. The humans had not only withstood their technological advantage, but had turned it against them. Zolvrak clenched his fists, his mind racing. "Fall back! Regroup!" he barked, trying to maintain control. In the heat of battle, Thomas felt a surge of confidence. His men were holding strong, their unity and discipline proving more effective than any advanced weaponry. The Phalanx had held, just as he knew it would. He glanced at his second-in-command, Lieutenant Mira, who nodded with fierce determination. "We push them now," Thomas said quietly, but with authority. "We've shown them our strength. Now we finish this." With a rallying cry, the human formation surged forward, moving as one. They pressed the attack, their spears flashing under the alien sun, each strike a testament to their resilience and resolve. The Federation troops, overwhelmed and disorganized, began to fall back in earnest, their confidence shattered. Zolvrak, watching his forces crumble before him, felt a pang of disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered. "How could they?" But it was too late for questions. The humans, with their unyielding spirit and ancient tactics reborn, had turned the tide. As the last of the Federation troops retreated to their ships, Thomas stood at the front of his men, his spear raised high. He knew this was just the beginning, that more battles would come. But for now, they had won the day. And in that victory, a message was clear: no matter the odds, humanity would stand firm, united and unbroken. The ground was littered with the remnants of the first battle, charred drones, and twisted metal fragments strewn across the battlefield. The acrid scent of scorched earth and ozone filled the air. Captain Thomas watched the retreating figures of the Galactic Federation troops with a grim sense of satisfaction. Their first victory had been decisive, but he knew the fight was far from over. "Gather the wounded and prepare the defenses," he commanded, his voice steady but urgent. "We've won a battle, not the war." Lieutenant Mira nodded, her expression hard but resolute. "Yes, sir. I'll have the medics ready and the engineers fortify our position." As the soldiers moved to carry out their orders, Thomas took a moment to assess the situation. The landscape around them was both a blessing and a curse. The rocky terrain offered natural barriers, but also limited their movement. The humans had managed to repel the initial assault, but the enemy would be back, stronger and more prepared. He turned to look at the makeshift command post where a group of his officers huddled around a holographic map of the region. The soft glow of the display cast sharp shadows on their faces, highlighting their fatigue and determination. "We need to anticipate their next move," Thomas said, stepping into the circle. His gaze fell on Lieutenant Kieran, the tactical officer. "Kieran, what's your assessment?" Kieran, a former military strategist from Earth's Eastern Alliance, adjusted his glasses and studied the map with a furrowed brow. "Commander Zolvrak will likely regroup and try a different approach. They underestimated us once, they won't make the same mistake again. My guess is they'll try to overwhelm us with numbers next, perhaps using heavier artillery to break our formation." Thomas nodded, his mind racing through the possibilities. "Then we'll need to be smarter, use the terrain to our advantage. We've shown them that brute force won't work, but they still have superior numbers and technology." Mira chimed in, her voice thoughtful. "We need to think like them. If I were Zolvrak, I'd exploit any perceived weakness. We must reinforce our defenses and set traps to slow their advance. Make them pay for every inch they try to take." A murmur of agreement spread through the officers. Thomas knew they were right. They had to anticipate the enemy's strategy and counter it with their own ingenuity. "All right, listen up," he said, his voice clear and commanding. "We're going to set up a series of defensive lines. Kieran, coordinate with the engineers to establish fortified positions along this ridge." He pointed to a high point on the map. "And here, in this valley. I want spikes, pits, and barricades. Make it as difficult as possible for them to get through." As the officers dispersed to relay orders, Thomas felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Dr. Elara Jacobs, the colony's chief medical officer. Her face was lined with worry, but her eyes held a steely determination. "Captain, we've set up a field hospital on the eastern ridge, but we're running low on medical supplies. If the battle drags on, we won't be able to treat everyone." Thomas nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. "I'll see what we can do, Dr. Jacobs. We may need to send a team to scavenge for supplies in the abandoned settlements. But right now, we have to focus on holding the line." Dr. Jacobs nodded, her concern momentarily masked by her resolve. "Just make sure you bring them back, Captain. Every one of them." The urgency in her voice resonated with him. The weight of leadership bore down on his shoulders like never before. He had to protect these people, his people. The sound of approaching footsteps drew his attention. It was Corporal Reeve, a young soldier with a keen eye and a sharper wit. "Captain, we've spotted movement to the north. It looks like a scouting party. They're moving fast and staying low." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "They're probing our defenses. They want to see what we're planning. We should send a team to intercept," Mira suggested. "Take them out quietly before they can report back." Thomas considered the suggestion. "Agreed. Mira, take a small squad. Move fast, stay low, and don't engage unless absolutely necessary. We can't risk alerting the main force." Mira nodded, already in motion. "I'll take Reeve and a couple of others. We'll be back before they even know we were there." As she disappeared into the shadows, Thomas turned back to the map, his mind working through the scenarios. The tension in the air was palpable, a tangible weight pressing down on them. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and isolated. But they were not beaten. Not yet. Hours passed, and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the encampment. The night brought with it an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional sound of distant footsteps or the quiet murmur of soldiers preparing for what was to come. Mira returned, her face set in a grim expression. "We took out the scouts, but they know we're preparing. They'll be coming soon, and they won't hold back." Thomas nodded, feeling the tension coil tighter within him. "Then we'll meet them head-on. We've shown them our resolve, now we'll show them our strength. Everyone, to your positions!" The soldiers moved with quiet determination, their movements swift and precise. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes a storm. Thomas stood at the forefront, his spear in hand, ready to lead his people once more into the fray. The night deepened, and the silence grew oppressive. Then, a distant rumble shattered the calm. The ground trembled, and Thomas knew their enemy was coming. This time, the battle would be fiercer, the stakes higher. But he was ready. They all were. The fight for Ethon 5 had only just begun, and they would defend their home with everything they had. The chill of the night air crept into the bones of every soldier as they braced for the impending assault. Darkness hung thick, broken only by the sporadic glimmers of starlight reflecting off the soldiers' shields. Captain Thomas remained at the front, his eyes scanning the horizon. The Federation troops would attack soon, testing the mettle of the human defenders once more. He glanced back at his men and women, the faces of comrades now hardened by experience. Each one was prepared for whatever came next, their breath steady, their eyes sharp. The silence was almost deafening, save for the distant sound of rustling leaves carried on the cold wind. Mira crouched beside him, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "They'll come at us hard this time," she whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. "They want to crush our spirit, make an example of us." Thomas nodded. "They think we're weak because we don't have their technology. They're wrong. They'll see what determination and unity can do." Just then, the night erupted in light and sound. Explosions lit up the landscape, and a barrage of energy blasts rained down on their position. The ground shook with the ferocity of the bombardment. But the human defenses held. The trenches they had dug, the barriers they had erected, all absorbed the initial onslaught. "Hold steady!" Thomas shouted over the din, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. "Keep your positions!" From behind their cover, the humans retaliated. Javelins launched with deadly accuracy, finding their marks in the advancing ranks of the Federation soldiers. The aliens' armor, so effective against energy weapons, proved vulnerable to the sharpened points of human ingenuity. The enemy hesitated, momentarily thrown off balance by the unexpected counterattack. "We're holding them!" Mira shouted, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "They're not invincible after all." Thomas gave a grim smile. "No, they're not. And we're just getting started." The ground assault followed. Waves of alien soldiers poured over the ridge, their war cries mingling with the sound of battle. Thomas felt the tension coil in his muscles, a tightness that only sharpened his focus. He raised his spear, a rallying symbol for his people. "Form up! Shields tight!" he commanded. The humans moved with a practiced precision, their shields interlocking to form an impenetrable barrier. Spears bristled outwards, ready to meet the charging enemy. The aliens crashed into the human line with the force of a storm, but the formation held firm. The clash of metal and the cries of battle filled the air, a symphony of conflict that drove every thought from Thomas's mind except one: survive. Amidst the melee, Kieran fought like a man possessed, his spear a blur of motion as he deflected blow after blow. His mind raced, calculating every move, every thrust. "Keep pushing them back," he shouted to those nearest him. "They can't maintain this forever." Thomas heard his words but kept his focus ahead. He could see Zalvrak's figure in the distance, directing the assault. The alien commander's frustration was evident even from this distance. Thomas knew that frustration could be exploited. "Lieutenant Mira!" he called out, catching her attention. "We need to disrupt their command. Get a team ready for a flanking maneuver." Mira nodded and quickly gathered a group of the swiftest soldiers. They slipped into the shadows, moving silently through the chaos. Thomas knew it was a risky move, but they needed to throw the enemy off balance. The battle raged on, a brutal contest of wills. The Federation troops, used to quick victories with overwhelming force, were unprepared for the tenacity of the human defenders. As Myra's team circled around, Zalvrak's position became vulnerable. The alien commander barked orders, trying to maintain control, but his forces were too spread out, too fragmented. Suddenly, Mira and her team emerged from the darkness, striking with deadly precision. They caught the Federation's command unit off guard, their swift attack causing chaos within the alien ranks. Zalvrak himself was forced to draw his weapon, fighting desperately to protect his position. "Now push!" Thomas shouted, sensing the moment of weakness. "This is our chance!" The human line surged forward with renewed vigor, driving into the disorganized Federation troops. Spears thrust with deadly intent, shields held firm against desperate counterattacks. The aliens, caught between the human advance and Myra's flanking strike, began to falter. Zalvrak, realizing the tide had turned, snarled in frustration. "Retreat!" he bellowed to his troops. "Fall back to the ridge! Regroup!" As the Federation soldiers began to pull back, Thomas ordered his troops to hold their ground. "Do not pursue!" he commanded. "Maintain formation. We've won the field, but we're not done yet." Breathing heavily, the human defenders watched as their enemy retreated, beaten once more. The night was still now, the only sounds those of the wounded and the weary. Thomas lowered his spear, his heart pounding in his chest. Mira returned to his side, a satisfied grin on her face. "That was close," she said, wiping sweat and grime from her brow. "But we did it." Thomas nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yes, but they'll be back. And next time, they'll be even more desperate. We've bought ourselves time, but we need to prepare for whatever comes next." He looked at his people, their faces a mix of relief and determination. They had proven their strength, but he knew this was far from over. The fight for Ethon 5 was only growing more intense, and they had to be ready for whatever lay ahead. The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it the scent of battle and the promise of more to come. But as Thomas stood among his soldiers, he felt a deep sense of resolve. They had held the line once again, and they would continue to do so, no matter the cost. This was their home, and they would defend it with everything they had. The dawn broke over the battlefield, casting a pale light over the weary faces of the human defenders. Captain Thomas stood at the edge of the ridge, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the remnants of the Federation forces were regrouping. The night's victory had been hard-fought, but there was no time for celebration. He could see the enemy's reinforcements arriving, a massive shadow looming against the morning sky. Mira joined him, her face drawn but determined. "They're bringing everything this time," she said, her voice low. "All or nothing." Thomas nodded. They want to crush us, and this once and for all. But they don't understand, we're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for our home, our future. He turned to the men and women behind him, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and resolve. We've come this far because we've fought together, as one. They think they can break us with numbers, with technology. But they don't know what it means to stand with your back against the wall and refuse to give up. The soldiers around him straightened, their weariness fading in the face of his words. Kieran stepped forward, his hand gripping his spear. We're with you, Captain. To the end. A murmur of agreement spread through the ranks. Thomas felt a swell of pride in his chest. They were ready to face whatever came next, to stand firm against the overwhelming odds. Prepare for the final defense, he ordered. Fortify our positions, check the traps, and make every shot count. We make our stand here. As his orders were relayed, Thomas moved through the camp, checking on his troops, offering words of encouragement. He found Dr. Jacobs at the field hospital, her hands stained with blood as she worked tirelessly to tend to the wounded. Doctor, how are we holding up? He asked, his voice gentle. She looked up, her face lined with fatigue. We're doing what we can, but supplies are running low. If this goes on much longer. Thomas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I know. Just keep them alive. We'll hold the line. She nodded, returning to her work with renewed focus. Thomas made his way back to the front, where Mira and Kieran were coordinating the defenses. They're moving, Mira said, pointing toward the enemy lines. It's only a matter of time now. Thomas took a deep breath, his mind racing. They needed an edge, something to turn the tide. Kieran, what's our status on the traps and defenses? Kieran checked his tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. All set. We've rigged the eastern slope with charges and reinforced the barricades. But it won't hold them forever. Thomas nodded. It doesn't have to. We just need to slow them down, make them bleed for every step. He turned to Mira. Get the sharpshooters in position. We need to pick them off before they get too close. And make sure the front line knows to fall back to the secondary position once they hit the first barricade. Mira nodded, moving swiftly to carry out his orders. Thomas watched her go, his mind heavy with the weight of command. Every decision he made now could mean the difference between life and death for his people. The sound of distant engines rumbled through the air, growing louder with each passing second. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the horizon. The Federation forces appeared, a dark wave cresting the ridge, their numbers seemingly endless. At the center, Zalvrak stood tall, his eyes locked on the human defenses. Thomas raised his voice, the sound carrying over the gathered soldiers. Hold your positions! Wait for my command! The enemy advanced, their formation tight and disciplined. Thomas could see the glint of their weapons, the shimmer of their armor. He knew this would be their fiercest battle yet. The tension in the air was palpable, a coiled spring ready to snap. Now! He shouted, and the battlefield erupted. Explosions tore through the ranks of the Federation troops as the hidden charges detonated, sending debris and alien bodies flying. Sharpshooters opened fire, their shots precise, picking off targets one by one. The first wave of attackers staggered, their advance momentarily halted by the sudden onslaught. Fall back to the second line! Thomas ordered, and the human soldiers moved with practiced precision, retreating to the fortified position behind them. The Federation regrouped quickly, pushing forward with renewed aggression. The humans met them with a wall of shields and spears, their determination unwavering. The clash of metal rang out, a brutal symphony of war. Thomas fought at the front, his spear a blur as he deflected strikes and countered with lethal force. Beside him, Mira and Kieran battled with equal ferocity, their movements synchronized like a well-rehearsed dance. The enemy pressed harder, their numbers pushing against the human line. Zalvrak's voice boomed over the battlefield, a mix of fury and frustration. Break them! Break them now! The Federation troops surged, their desperation evident. The human line buckled under the strain, the weight of the enemy's advance threatening to overwhelm them. Thomas felt the pressure mounting, the strain of holding the line growing with each passing moment. "Hold! Hold!" he shouted, his voice raw. Just as it seemed they might falter, a sudden roar filled the air. From behind the human lines, a group of reserve fighters charged forward, their weapons raised, their voices a battle cry of defiance. They slammed into the flank of the Federation forces, driving them back with a renewed surge of strength. Thomas seized the moment. "Push forward! Don't let them regroup!" The human soldiers rallied, their spirits lifted by the unexpected reinforcements. They pressed the attack, driving the Federation troops back step by step. Zalvrak's forces, caught off guard by the sudden counterattack, began to waver. Thomas moved with purpose, his spear finding its mark again and again. The tide was turning, the enemy faltering. He could see the fear in their eyes, the realization that they might not win this fight. With a final, desperate effort, Zalvrak ordered a retreat. The Federation soldiers broke rank, fleeing back over the ridge, their spirits shattered. The humans held their ground, their victory hard-won and absolute. Thomas lowered his spear, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They had done it. They had held the line, repelled the invaders. As he looked around at his people, battered but unbroken, he felt a deep sense of pride. The fight for Ethon 5 was over, but their resolve had only just begun to show the galaxy what humanity could achieve when united against a common threat.